Some foods cause us a lot more trouble than others when it comes to trying to moderate how much we eat. The foods that have come in for most stick recently in terms of health and well-being are the foods that are called ultra-processed. Ultra-processed foods are the most highly processed, usually produced in factories, and they undergo a number of processes and transformations to give them taste and texture and a long shelf life. Although there are arguments about these definitions, there's a huge concern about the effects that these foods are having on our health, both in terms of our physical health and also on our brains, and in terms of weight gain. A problem is that they're really easy to overeat, and that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to explain why that is, the 3 things that contribute to them being super easy to overconsume, and then I'll share with you an exercise, a practical exercise that I've developed with clients that have dramatically changed how people taste and enjoy or don't enjoy the foods that they once really overate. The foods that we're talking about here are the sort of foods that are brightly packaged, often placed in sort of really obvious places in the supermarket, things that when you eat them are super moreish, and that very often you can eat way beyond the point of satisfaction. I'm going to explain what it is about these foods that have these effects. First of all, by describing how it is that the tastes of these foods matter in terms of how we're sort of driven to keep eating. Then I'll talk about the textures of foods that affect the speed with which we eat them. And then I'll mention how it is that we keep getting reminded of these foods, the way that our appetite for them is triggered repeatedly during the course of a single day maybe. So first, to do with taste, these foods have been carefully engineered and rigorously consumer tested to produce combinations of flavours and sequences of flavours that stimulate your appetite rather than satisfy it, so that each time you take a bite you're wanting more rather than sort of losing interest in food. If you think about the way that you eat regular food, maybe a sort of regular meal, as you keep eating it, you sort of lose interest in the food. It satisfies you to a degree. But with foods that have been engineered in this way, you can find that what happens with each mouthful of food is that you're sort of thinking ahead and anticipating the next one with a sort of eagerness, sometimes maybe even a sort of desperation. What this careful engineering and consumer testing is looking for is creating what the industry calls a bliss point. So that is the point at which, with the combinations of flavours and the layering of flavours and textures, you reach a point where the food is at its maximal enjoyment, its peak tastiness and palatableness. These foods are actually called hyperpalatable foods. But of course, this is partly to do with what's happening in your brain when you're eating these foods. And it seems that what's happening with these hyperpalatable foods is that the pleasure centres in your brain are absolutely popping when you're eating them. And that means that you simply want to keep on eating. Even if you've made a decision earlier that you were only going to eat one of, let's say, a Snickers Duo pack, and you were only going to eat one, it's not that unlikely that you'll find yourself reaching for the second because of this sort of stimulation of the desire and the wanting to keep going with the pleasure. The second feature of these foods that's associated with eating more is that they tend to be quite soft textured. Even if there's a crispy element to them or a crunchy element to them, they tend to be soft and require very little chewing, unlike some foods that if you take maybe some lightly cooked vegetables, or you think about eating, if you eat meat, think about eating a steak, those things take a lot of chewing. But these very highly processed foods don't. And that means that we eat them faster, and we know it's really well established that faster eating is associated with weight gain. It's really hard to lose weight when you're eating quickly compared with if you can slow down your eating. So foods that are easy to eat quickly are problematic in themselves. And this speed of eating particularly matters because these foods are very energy dense. They pack a lot of calories per gram, and that means that the faster you eat, the hugely increased amount of energy you're taking in, which you may not need. The third thing that influences how much we eat is how continually we are reminded of these ultra-processed foods. They are advertised on a level which is a bit mind-blowing, really. Hundreds of billions of dollars are spent globally each year on advertising food. Can you believe that figure? It's the most enormous budget. And it's not all anymore, it's not all sort of random advertising. It's not just hoardings at the bus stop anymore. When you are online or when you're gaming, you are being fed very specific, targeted adverts, not just for foods, but including foods, which take into account everything that the algorithm of the site that you're on knows about you. So you'll be getting adverts for things that the advertisers know you're already interested in. And because they're popping up on your feed, or because they're popping up during a game, you may not really realise that you're seeing them. They may be almost, not literally subliminal, but they may be happening at a level where you're barely conscious that you're seeing the food. And the thing is that once you do see the food and you're reminded of it, that activates your appetite system, and you're likely to be thinking about food more, and maybe particularly about the thing you've just seen advertised. So it seems like the odds are stacked against us, really, when it comes to these highly processed, very carefully engineered foods. On the one hand, they can be a real source of pleasure, they can feel like a real treat, and there's no reason that they can't be part of your overall eating pattern. But in working with people over many years, I've found, you won't be surprised to know that I've found that the most problematic foods for people are these super tasty foods, the highly processed foods, and people have real difficulty cutting down on these. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share with you an exercise that I've used with clients, but to make sense of that exercise, first I'll explain one of the things that I really encourage people to do when they are working with me using appetite retraining, generally in relation to food. That thing is to make sure that whenever you're eating, whatever you're eating, this isn't just about ultra-processed foods now, whenever you're eating, slow down, pay attention and focus on the food so that you get all of the pleasure that is potentially in that food. If you're distracted and you think about something else whilst you're eating, you're going to get all the calories. You get all the calories when you consume the food, but whether or not you get the pleasure that's available in that food depends on where you put your attention. So whatever you're eating, if you want to get more joy and enjoyment from eating, paying attention to each bite and the flavours and the textures in the food will really enhance your enjoyment of food. And that's what happens over and over again when I work with people. They get much more enjoyment from than they ever did before, and that's whilst they're losing weight using appetite retraining. Now, to come back to ultra-processed foods, Something absolutely fascinating happens when you take that approach to eating these types of highly processed foods. Through working with individuals, I have discovered that when you really slow down and savour these so-called junk foods, the tastes and the textures change dramatically. And I'm going to share with you 2 examples here, one savoury and one sweet. Maya had a thing about savoury snacks in the evening. It was a time of day when she relaxed, and what had happened over the years is that her consumption of crisps and salty snacks had crept up, and so had her weight. And she was unhappy with her weight, but she was particularly unhappy with this sense of being a bit out of control around this evening crisps habit. She was easily getting through multi-packs of things like Monster Munch in an evening. One of her favourite salty snacks was Pringles. She would open a tube, the large tube, not the small tube. She would open a tube, and as she was watching TV, she found that she was at the end of the pack before she really realised what she was doing. It didn't feel like an out of control binge, it just felt like mindlessly hoovering her way through the Pringles. It's something that she felt she enjoyed, so she hadn't wanted to give it up entirely. So what we did was take a different approach rather than trying to cut them out. And this new approach was to take one Pringle in the evening, open a packet of Pringles, open a tube, take one Pringle and, not with the TV on, just savour it. So hold it in her mouth, bite it, and really notice that when she attended to it, when she really focused on it, what that single Pringle was like. In theory, she'd get much more flavour and pleasure out of it by doing this. But what was absolutely fascinating was that when she did this, something that she'd always experienced as a sort of crispy, melting, salty treat tasted like a mouthful of claggy chemicals. That's how she described it. And she found that almost in a moment, her feeling about these snacks that she had been consuming day in, day out in the evening changed dramatically, and she lost interest in them. What she did instead was experiment with other foods that in a planned way she might enjoy during the evening, but that's another story. Another example, this time with a sweet food, is from Courtney, who had a thing for chocolate chip cookies. At the end of a busy working day, she'd curl up on the sofa and would eat her way through these delicious treats as she'd always found them. If she didn't have any in the house, her desire was so great that she would go out, whether it was dark or not, she would go out in all weathers and buy some so that she could have this super special treat while she was watching the TV in the evening. When Courtney did this exercise of taking just one bite of the cookie and holding it in her mouth and really relishing the textures and the tastes and focusing on them with no distraction, what she found was that it was, as she put it, it's like just putting spoonfuls of sugar in my mouth. I can't really taste anything else. And again, she said, I don't know what's happened, but cookies have lost their allure for me now. Okay, so here's the exercise that you can use for yourself. It's quite simple. You want to make a bit of time for this exercise and not rush it. It won't take all that long, but it's something to be done with no distractions and allowing yourself quite a few minutes to do it. So turn off the TV and your phone so that you haven't got any other distractions for a moment. Have the snack ready. Maybe choose a thing that you find difficult to resist. and take one bite. Hold it in your mouth and notice any flavours that you sense immediately. Then take a bite of it and notice the textures and any other flavours that now show up. And then chew this mouthful slowly so that potentially you can get all the pleasure that's available in this mouthful of food right now. And then notice what happened. Notice exactly how much pleasure you got from this one mouthful. Okay, that's the exercise. So the great thing about doing this is that there are two possible outcomes. One is that actually you absolutely loved the experience and this mouthful was really, really pleasurable. If that's the case, then what I'd suggest to you is that you maybe allow this food, this particular treat, to be part of your overall pattern of eating, but maybe make a bit of an occasion of it, and rather than let it develop its mindless eating pattern, make an occasion of it, look forward to it, relish it while you're eating it, and then enjoy the memory of it. If, on the other hand, you found that you were as disappointed as both Maya and Courtney were, then you'll probably have a very different feeling about these treats in the future, and you're very likely to find that you're able to walk past them in the supermarket in a way that you may not have been able to do before. And of course, if there are a number of foods that hook you in this way, then you can do this exercise with each of them in turn and find out whether there is actually one that remains pleasurable when you slowly savour it instead of eating it quickly and with little attention. If you're struggling with cutting down on unhealthy foods and you want my professional help, click the link in the description below to see ways in which I might be able to help. Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm making a range of videos on all aspects of the psychology of eating and appetite and weight loss, and you can click onto the link here for the next video.